What would you do when hunger drives men beyond humanity? In the frozen ruins, I walk through shadows where survival means unthinkable choices. This is Forgotten History Tales, and tonight I pull you into Stalingrad's encircled nightmare, where even the snow remembers. The snow is not silent. It cracks beneath boots, groans under the weight of corpses half buried in white drifts, and whispers with the wind that carries the smell of death. I take you there, inside the tightening noose of steel and fire, where men starve, freeze, and claw at scraps of humanity to survive. The world has shrunk to a ring of enemy guns, a prison without walls, only endless snow stretching in all directions. And inside this prison, the unspeakable begins. It is the winter of 1942 to 43 in the shattered city of Stalingrad. The German Sixth Army, once a spearhead of conquest, now finds itself trapped, encircled, surrounded by the Red Army in what the Germans will come to call the Kessel, the cauldron. The temperature plunges to 40 below. The air is so sharp that it burns the lungs with every breath. The sky, a gray shroud, drops powdery snow that hides bodies one moment and reveals them the next, as if mocking the living with reminders of their fate. I feel the hunger gnawing, not mine, but theirs. Soldiers, once proud in crisp uniforms, now ragged skeletal shadows. Their eyes are hollow, their cheeks sunken. Leather belts are boiled for soup. Horses are slaughtered, not for glory, but for marrow. And then, when the horses are gone, the silence grows heavier, darker. I walk among them in the barracks, where the air is thick with the stink of unwashed bodies, of frost-bitten flesh blackened like charred wood. Soldiers huddle together for warmth, their breath condensing in weak clouds that rise and fade. Somewhere, a man coughs, and the sound rattles like dry paper. Typhus spreads, lice crawl, and morale crumbles. But hunger, that is the true enemy here. Hunger turns comrades into scavengers. Hunger strips away dignity, faith, and even the boundaries of morality. I see it in the way men stare at their dead, not with grief, but calculation. The thin line between survival and damnation grows blurred in this frozen wasteland, and rumors begin, whispered, denied, then whispered again. Some men speak of meat found in strange places, a quartermaster accused of cutting flesh from corpses before burial, a patrol that returned without one of its own, the survivors refusing to explain. I place myself in their minds. Imagine the despair. Imagine knowing that rescue is a lie, that supplies dropped by air are too little, too late. Imagine the bitter irony of once being conquerors, of sweeping through fields, devouring nations, and now gnawing on the frozen bones of fellow soldiers. The Red Army watches from the encircling ring. They hear the radio intercepts, desperate pleas for food, for reinforcements, for a miracle. They do not come. Hitler's orders are absolute: no retreat, no surrender. Fight to the last man. The last man, starved, frostbitten, mad. And in this crucible, cannibalism is no longer a tale to frighten men. It becomes reality. There is testimony, captured diaries, later interrogations. A soldier writes, "Today we buried Müller, but by night some of the flesh was missing. I do not ask who took it. I cannot. The firewood crackles, a pot boils. It smells of meat, but no horse remains, no dog, no rat, only the silence of denial around the pot. I do not condemn them. How can I? The mind fractures in starvation. Men lose themselves. Humanity is not a fortress. It is snow, melting under heat, vanishing in desperation. Outside, the battle rages faintly. The Red Army tightens the ring. The sound of artillery is distant thunder, but inside the cauldron, The louder sound is emptiness, the growl of the belly, the ache in the marrow, the breaking of the human spirit. And still, discipline lingers in fragments. Officers order men to hold positions, to man machine guns that freeze and jam in the snow. But what is an army without bread, without warmth? It is no longer an army. It is a graveyard waiting to be acknowledged. I run my fingers along frost-covered rifles abandoned in the trenches. I see the way some soldiers stare into the horizon as if salvation might rise with the dawn. But salvation never comes. Only hunger. Only cold. And so I leave you with this image. A group of men huddled in the ruins of a cellar, their faces ghostly in the candlelight, a pot simmering between them. They do not look at each other. They do not ask questions. The spoon trembles as it lifts to a mouth, and outside, the Red Army prepares its next assault. The ring is closing tighter. The cauldron is about to boil over. The night crackles with fire. Shells explode in distant arcs, painting the horizon with brief, violent light. I take you deeper now, into the heart of the encirclement, where the Sixth Army's world shrinks by the hour. What was once a vast battlefield has become a suffocating coffin of snow and ruins. The men know it. They feel it with every gnaw of hunger, every shiver of cold, every stare into the abyss of hopelessness. And still, orders demand, hold the line. Do not surrender. It is late December 1942. The frost has hardened into armor, unyielding beneath boots. The ruined city of Stalingrad is no longer a city, but a grave of shattered bricks and twisted steel. The Volga River lies frozen, its surface a mirror to the blackened ruins rising like jagged teeth. I hear the whistle of Soviet Katyusha rockets screaming overhead, their sound like banshees tearing through the night. The ground shakes. Glassless windows rattle. Walls collapse, burying men in icy rubble. And yet, worse than the bombs is the emptiness of the stomachs. Each ration is a cruel joke. Bread stretched with sawdust, soup brewed from rotting potato peelings. When the meager parcels from the air arrive, men claw at them like animals, knowing each mouthful means another day stolen from death. But the Luftwaffe cannot keep up. The icy sky swallows their planes, and Soviet fighters hunt them down. Supplies fall in the wrong places, sometimes directly into Soviet hands. The cauldron tightens. The Red Army presses from all sides, relentless, patient, strangling slowly. I walk into the command posts, dimly lit by flickering oil lamps. Maps are spread across tables, lines drawn in desperation. Faces are hollow, voices hoarse. General Paulus, once confident, now wears the pallor of defeat. His eyes sink deeper into their sockets each day, as if shadows consume him from within. I hear the arguments. Some officers whisper of breakout. Others cling to Hitler's promise of relief. Operation Winter Storm, a rescue from the south, spearheaded by Field Marshal Manstein. The word spreads like fire in frozen veins. Relief is coming. Hold on. Hold just a little longer. But days turn to weeks. The tanks never arrive. The footsteps never come. And men begin to realize they have been abandoned. I feel the despair take shape. It is more than hunger now. It is betrayal. The belief that their Führer has condemned them, chained them to this frozen pit for the sake of pride. In the cellars, soldiers sit shoulder to shoulder, silent, conserving strength. Some scribble letters they know will never reach home. Some pray to a God they have not spoken to in years. And some stare blankly, their minds hollowed, their humanity eroded. The snow outside glows faintly under the moon, and within that light, scavengers move, men dragging corpses from the frozen earth, sawing through stiff limbs. It is no longer rumor, it is seen, witnessed. The unspeakable has become ordinary. I hear one soldier mutter, "Meat is meat." His voice is flat, lifeless, as if he has shed the burden of shame. But not all can stomach it. Others recoil, their minds rebelling against survival's cruel demand. Yet hunger gnaws relentlessly, and eventually the line blurs for more. The choice is not between honor and disgrace, it is between life and death. The Red Army listens to intercepted radio calls. They hear the desperation, the faltering voices. One Soviet officer later recalls, "We knew the Germans were finished when they began speaking less like soldiers and more like beggars." And still, Paulus obeys his orders. Still, he commands men to fight for ruins already stained with blood. Still, he clings to the hope that Hitler will save them. But salvation is not in the air. It is not in the snow. It is not in the empty bellies of his men. I feel the claustrophobia, the way the encirclement presses not just against their bodies, but their minds. A man trapped is a man haunted. His imagination becomes an enemy louder than artillery. Some begin hallucinating, visions of warm homes, of mothers' kitchens, of bread steaming on wooden tables. They reach for it, only to wake with frost clinging to their lips. Others fall into madness, laughing at nothing, singing to ghosts. And some give up entirely, lying down in the snow, closing their eyes, welcoming the warmth of death's embrace. Their comrades do not stop them. They cannot. They are too weak. The encirclement is no longer just physical. It is spiritual. It strangles hope, corrodes faith, and leaves only the raw instinct to survive. And as December turns into January, the cauldron grows tighter still. Relief will not come. The Red Army sharpens its knives. I see Paulus staring at his maps, the silence of his command post broken only by the scratching of pencils, marking retreat after retreat. The end is inevitable. But how much further into the abyss will these men fall before it arrives? The sky is black with smoke. The frozen ruins of Stalingrad glow faintly, as if the city itself were burning from within. I take you now into January of 1943, when the tightening noose becomes unbearable, when discipline falters, and when the mind itself begins to fracture under the weight of hunger, cold, and despair. Here, the true horrors of encirclement rise, not just in the battlefield, but in the haunted corridors of the human soul. By now, the Sixth Army is withering. What once numbered over 300,000 has been whittled down by frost, shellfire, and starvation. The encircled troops are shadows, uniforms in tatters, boots falling apart, eyes dulled like lifeless glass. I walk with them through streets no longer recognizable, streets where snow piles over rubble and frozen corpses serve as macabre signposts. Dogs are gone. Horses are gone. Even rats are scarce, hunted until none remain. The silence of hunger is louder than any bombardment. Every sound, wind through ruins, boots crunching ice, the faint groan of a man too weak to rise, becomes part of the deathly chorus of the cauldron. And yet, even in this hell, the machinery of command grinds on. General Paulus still issues orders, still marks positions on maps, still radios Berlin for relief, but the soldiers no longer believe. They know. They feel it in their bones. They have been abandoned. The cracks appear first in whispers. Men refuse orders, pretending illness. Others desert their posts, seeking food in ruined houses instead of holding the line. And still others snap completely, their minds splintering into madness. I hear the voices, songs echoing in the night, eerie, discordant, sung by men who have lost their reason. One soldier chants hymns until his throat is raw, convinced that angels will descend to carry him away. Another sharpens his bayonet and stares at his comrades, his hunger turning suspicion into paranoia. And beneath it all, the unspoken truth festers: cannibalism. It is no longer just whispers. It is real. Patrols stumble upon half-buried bodies with flesh carved away. Cellars reek not just of smoke, but of cooked meat that no ration could explain. One diary, recovered after the battle, writes with dreadful honesty: "We no longer ask what we eat. We only eat." The Red Army knows. They see it in the hollow eyes of prisoners they capture. They hear it in intercepted calls, voices breaking, pleading for bread. Soviet soldiers begin to call their enemies not Germans, but ghouls. And still the front lines rumble. The Soviets tighten their grip with artillery barrages that shatter walls and men alike. The ground trembles, and yet, for many inside the pocket, death by shell seems preferable to the slower death gnawing from within. What does hunger do to the mind? I feel it as I walk among them. It strips away memory, language, morality. It reduces thought to a single point: food. All else, honor, duty, country, fades into ash. Men stare at each other differently now. A wounded comrade is no longer a brother in arms, but a resource. The dying man sees it in their eyes: fear mixed with hunger, pity blurred with calculation. Discipline collapses not with mutiny, but with silence. Orders are given and ignored, not with defiance, but with emptiness. The soldiers have moved beyond obedience, beyond rebellion. They exist only in survival's shadow. Some commit suicide, ending the torment themselves. Others cling to fragments of belief, crosses kissed, prayers whispered through cracked lips. But even faith trembles in this place, where God seems absent, leaving only the white desert of snow and despair. I cannot help but feel the mythic weight pressing here. Stalingrad is no longer just a battlefield. It is a descent into the underworld. The snow is not snow, but a shroud. The city is not a city, but a tomb. These men are shades, wandering between life and death, their stories already slipping into legend. Some will be remembered as martyrs, others as monsters, but all as victims of a machine that demanded their sacrifice. I hear the echoes of history itself whispering, "Here is where hubris dies. Here is where pride devours its own sons." And then the hammer falls. The Soviets prepare their final assault, columns of tanks and artillery massing in the snow, ready to crush what remains of the Sixth Army. Inside the pocket, men whisper of surrender, of survival at any cost. Paulus stares at his maps, paralyzed between obedience and despair. The city is about to become a grave. And the question remains: when the last defenses collapse, what will be left? Soldiers, or only starving ghosts? The ground shakes. Artillery rains down in an unbroken storm, shattering walls, ripping through snow, turning the frozen city into a cauldron of fire and ice. I take you into January's final days, when the Red Army unleashes its hammer, and the Sixth Army, starving, broken, and skeletal, faces annihilation. The end is no longer distant. It roars at the gates. It is mid-January 1943. Operation Ring, the Soviet plan to crush the encircled Germans, begins with thunder. Thousands of guns open fire, their shells screaming through the air. The horizon glows with infernal light. The snow itself seems to burn, blackened by fire and smoke. I walk among the ruins, where every sound is amplified. The crash of collapsing buildings, the metallic whine of tanks grinding forward, the cries of men as they are buried alive under debris. The Volga, frozen and cracked, reflects the carnage like a mirror of hell. Inside the Kessel, there is no longer strategy, only desperation. Lines are thin, weapons frozen, ammunition scarce. The men, gaunt and trembling, cling to rifles too heavy for their wasted bodies. They are not soldiers now. They are phantoms armed with steel. The Soviet assault is methodical. They squeeze the pocket smaller each day, block by block, ruin by ruin. Soviet tanks crush barricades of bricks and corpses alike. Infantry sweep forward with bayonets gleaming. The Germans fire when they can. But hunger makes their aim unsteady. Frost makes their fingers stiff. I hear the Red Army's cries, guttural, rising in waves. Ura! Ura! The sound shakes even the most hardened veterans, for it is not just a battle cry, it is the voice of inevitability. In the command posts, Paulus stares at his maps. His staff officers argue. Some plead for surrender. Others repeat Hitler's command. Fight to the last bullet. Paulus, pale and silent, writes reports, each more detached than the last. He speaks of units holding, when in truth they are dissolving into snow and shadows. The soldiers know the truth. Discipline collapses entirely now. Some surrender in groups, throwing down rifles and staggering toward the Soviet lines with hands raised. Others fight in small, desperate pockets, holding basements, sewers, factories. And others vanish into madness, choosing suicide over capture. And then there are those who do not fight at all, too weak, too starved, lying in ruins, waiting for shells to finish what hunger began. The city groans like a dying beast. I feel the terror, but also the release. For some men, the Soviet onslaught is almost a relief. No more waiting, no more gnawing hunger. Just the end, swift and merciless. But for others, it is the deepest horror yet. They see the Soviets as avengers, merciless in victory. Fear of capture drives some to acts of despair. A man burns his last bullet in his own skull rather than face the enemy. Another sets fire to his shelter, vanishing in flames rather than surrender. Cannibalism continues in the shadows, but it no longer shocks. It is drowned beneath the thunder of war. A final diary entry captures the descent. The Russians are at the gates. We have no food, no ammunition. I no longer recognize the faces of my comrades. We are shadows. Perhaps it is better this way. The myth of the invincible Wehrmacht crumbles here, in the snow and fire. An army that once swept across continents is reduced to begging for bread, gnawing on corpses, waiting for death. I cannot escape the sense of judgment in this moment. The Sixth Army, trapped by its own hubris, becomes not just a defeated force, but a symbol. The snow is not just snow. It is a shroud, covering arrogance with silence. The fire is not just fire. It is vengeance, consuming men who believe themselves untouchable. History itself seems to whisper through the smoke. Here ends the illusion of conquest. Here begins the reckoning. The Soviets advance with grim determination. To them, this is not just a battle. It is justice for the millions who have suffered. The ruins of Stalingrad are no longer a battlefield. They are an altar of sacrifice, where the price of hubris is paid in blood and bone. And so, the noose tightens. The Sixth Army is split into fragments, pockets of starving men clinging to ruins. Paulus retreats into silence, his hands trembling over reports he knows are lies. The Soviets prepare for the final blow. The city of ghosts is about to collapse entirely. And when it does, what remains will not be soldiers, but the wreckage of an army that once believed itself immortal. The guns fall silent, but the silence is worse. It is the sound of defeat, the sound of an army collapsing not with a roar, but with a whimper. I take you into the final days of January 1943, when the once mighty Sixth Army, encircled, starved, and shattered, finally bows its head. And in that silence, the world witnesses not only the surrender of men, but the surrender of illusions. By late January, the Kessel has shrunk into two halves. The northern pocket around Paulus's command at the Univermag department store, and the southern pocket of ruins, where fragments of divisions still cling to life. The Soviets have split the army apart, driving wedges through the ruins, crushing resistance methodically. Snow falls constantly, muting the chaos, softening the outlines of collapsed buildings, covering corpses with a thin, deceptive purity. But beneath that white veil, the truth festers. Starved men wander aimlessly, weapons dropped, eyes glazed with delirium. I feel the cold seeping into their bones, the hopelessness pressing into their lungs. Their radios sputter with static. Their leaders are silent. Their rations are gone. What remains is only the shadow of an army. On January 30th, Hitler promotes Paulus to field marshal. The message is clear, though unsaid. No German field marshal has ever surrendered. The honor of death is expected. Suicide. A gunshot echo in a frozen room. That is the unspoken order. But Paulus does not oblige. He sits in his command post, hands trembling, face pale, his voice weak. "I have no intention of shooting myself for that Bavarian corporal," he mutters to his staff. It is not defiance, nor courage. It is exhaustion, the last gasp of a man already hollowed out. The next day, the Soviets storm the Univermag. The walls shake with explosions, and Paulus, pale and trembling, surrenders without ceremony. The once proud commander of 300,000 men is led into captivity. He looks less like a general and more like a ghost wearing epaulets. Across the ruins, surrender spreads like fire through dry grass. Thousands of men, skeletal and ragged, stagger from their holes and cellars with hands raised. They drop rifles frozen stiff, helmets dented, bodies swaying in the icy wind. Soviet soldiers watch in astonishment. Some cannot believe these are the same Germans who once seemed unstoppable, the same army that had ravaged their homeland. The Red Army rounds them up in groups. The prisoners shuffle through snow, boots leaving shallow trails, their faces masks of despair. Some weep, others stare blankly. A few clutch crosses, whispering prayers as if God might still hear them in this white graveyard. And yet, even in surrender, horror clings. Reports filter back of cellars where flesh was stripped from corpses, of men who survived by feeding on their dead. Soviet soldiers recoil, calling them vampires of the Volga. The myth of German invincibility dies not only in defeat, but in degradation. I feel the shame heavy in the air, thicker than smoke. The soldiers are not only beaten, they are broken. Their eyes no longer shine with the pride of conquest, but with the dull resignation of cattle led to slaughter. For some, surrender is relief. The waiting is over, the hunger answered not with food, but with the certainty of captivity. For others, it is humiliation, worse than death. They mutter about betrayal, about Hitler, about an empire that demanded their sacrifice and abandoned them in return. But for many, thought itself has ended. The hunger, the frost, the endless bombardment have stripped them of words, of reflection. They shuffle forward, silent, shadows of men. The Soviets, hardened by years of suffering, show little pity. They herd the prisoners east, toward camps where starvation will continue in different forms. Out of the 90,000 who surrender, only a fraction will ever see Germany again. For most, Stalingrad is not the end of their suffering. It is only the beginning. In this moment, I feel the weight of myth pressing upon history. Stalingrad is no longer just a battle. It is a turning of the world. The German war machine, once unstoppable, is humbled in the snow. The myth of invincibility shatters. The snow itself feels symbolic, covering the ruins like a burial shroud. The Volga, frozen and silent, reflects not triumph, but judgment. Stalingrad becomes more than a place. It becomes a word that will echo through centuries, synonymous with hubris punished, with the breaking point of empires. I see the soldiers marching into captivity, not as individuals, but as fragments of a legend undone. Their suffering is immense, their choices unthinkable. They are both victims and perpetrators, both men and ghosts, fading into the mythic landscape of war. And yet, even as the guns fall silent, the story does not end here. For survival is not guaranteed in captivity. Hunger, disease, and despair follow these men into the camps, shadows clinging to their every step. The question lingers like frost in the air. What does survival mean, when survival itself is a continuation of horror? The snow-covered grave of Stalingrad has closed, but for the men led eastward, the nightmare has only just begun. The war does not end with surrender. I take you onto the frozen roads of Russia, where the survivors of Stalingrad march eastward, not toward freedom, but toward another abyss. Their weapons are gone, their banners fallen, their commanders silent, and yet the hunger still clings to them, the frost still gnaws at their bones. Surrender has spared them from bullets, but it has not spared them from death. It is February 1943. The battle for Stalingrad is finished, but the nightmare of captivity has begun. I walk beside the columns of prisoners as they stumble through snow. Their boots are worn thin, many wrapped in rags. Their uniforms hang loose over skeletal frames. The wind cuts their faces like knives, and the sky above is endless, gray and merciless. The Soviets drive them forward, bayonets glinting, orders barked in harsh Russian syllables. The prisoners march not as soldiers, but as phantoms, shadows of the army that once terrorized Europe. Out of nearly 300,000 men who entered the Kessel, only about 90,000 surrender. And now, as they trudge east, even that number dwindles with every mile. The march is a slow massacre. Frostbite blackens toes until they fall off in rags. Men collapse in the snow, too weak to rise, their comrades stepping around them in silence. A gunshot cracks, or a bayonet thrust follows. The column does not pause. The march continues. I hear the coughs, wet, ragged, the sound of lungs consumed by pneumonia and tuberculosis. The sick are dragged along until they fall, and when they fall, they do not rise. Hunger remains the constant companion. The Soviets provide little food, sometimes a crust of bread, sometimes a ladle of thin soup. Men claw at it desperately, their hollow eyes blazing with animal instinct. Some recall the horrors of Stalingrad and whisper that captivity is no different. Starvation merely continues under a new master. The cruel irony is unbearable. They fought to the last crumb of bread, and now, in surrender, the famine stretches on like an endless shadow. And then comes the journey by rail. Cattle cars jammed with prisoners, sealed tight against the winter air. The men are packed so closely that they cannot sit, cannot lie down. The stink of unwashed bodies, of urine, of fever, fills the dark. Days pass in suffocating silence. When the doors finally open, some stumble out into the snow. Others remain standing, dead, their frozen bodies propped upright by the press of the living. I feel the unraveling of the human spirit. Stalingrad stripped them of pride, but captivity strips them of identity. They are no longer soldiers, no longer men of the Wehrmacht. They are numbers. Shadows herded into camps across the endless Russian steppe. Some cling to fragments of hope, dreams of home, of wives, and children waiting in faraway villages. They whisper to each other about a future that grows dimmer with every passing day. Others surrender to despair, their eyes vacant, their minds numb. And in the darkest corners, the hunger whispers again. In some camps, starvation becomes so severe that cannibalism reappears, not in whispers now, but in rumors that ripple through the barracks. Corpses found stripped of flesh, men accused and executed by their own fellow prisoners. The nightmare of Stalingrad echoes into captivity, a ghost that refuses to die. What does it mean to survive when survival itself demands the surrender of humanity? That is the question these men face in the frozen silence of the Soviet camps. Here, the journey takes on the feel of a medieval danse macabre, a procession of the damned marching into the maw of winter. The snow-covered roads are no longer just roads, but pathways into the underworld. The camps are not barracks, but purgatories where souls linger between life and death. I cannot help but feel that history itself watches them with cold eyes. These were men who once strode across Europe with arrogance, convinced of their destiny, and now they shuffle like beggars, prisoners of a destiny that turned against them. Their fall is not just military, it is mythic, a collapse from the heights of conquest into the depths of humiliation. And so the march continues, eastward, ever eastward, into camps where disease festers and hunger reigns. Thousands die along the way, their bodies left by the roadside, covered swiftly by drifting snow. Of the 90,000 who surrender, only a fraction will live to see their homeland again. For most, captivity is not salvation, but a slower death. The cauldron of Stalingrad has closed, but in the camps of the East, a new cauldron begins to boil. The years drag on. The battle is long over, the guns silent, yet for the survivors of Stalingrad, captivity stretches like an endless winter. I take you now into the camps of the Soviet hinterland, where men who once marched under banners of conquest now wither in wooden barracks, staring at frost-rimmed walls, counting the days that never seem to end. Here, the horror is not the roar of battle. It is the slow erosion of body and soul. It is 1943, then 1944, and still the prisoners remain. They are scattered across Siberia, Kazakhstan, the Urals, names that to them sound like exile itself. The camps are little more than wooden huts, barbed wire, and watchtowers, surrounded by endless snow or barren steppe. I feel the bite of the wind inside these barracks. Frost creeps across the wooden planks like veins of ice. The stench of sickness lingers in the air, mixed with the sour odor of watery soup and unwashed bodies. Each morning, the guards rattle the doors, driving the men out to forced labor. They march in columns, weak legs stumbling through snow, to fell trees, dig earth, build roads. Their bodies, already wasted by Stalingrad, crumble further under the endless toil. Hunger remains their companion, though now it is rationed misery rather than desperate chaos. A piece of bread so small it can be swallowed in one bite, stretched by ritual into 3. A ladle of cabbage soup so thin it tastes only of water. The strong fight for survival, hoarding scraps, trading favors for food. The weak fall by the wayside, collapsing in the snow or succumbing to disease in the barracks. Typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. These names become as familiar as the names of their old comrades. I hear the coughing fits, the groans in the night. I see the blankets rise and fall with shallow breaths, then fall still. Each dawn, bodies are dragged out, stacked like firewood, covered in snow until burial. And yet, through it all, fragments of humanity persist. Men teach each other languages, sketch on scraps of paper, whisper poems in the dark. Some cling to faith, some to memory, some to the faint dream of return. Letters arrive, months or years delayed. Some bring joy, news of wives waiting, children growing. Others bring despair, families gone, homes destroyed, lives erased. For many, the words are not read aloud, but folded and pressed against hollow chests, treasures in a world stripped bare. I feel the long weight of captivity pressing on their minds. Stalingrad had broken their bodies. The camps now test their spirits. Some adapt, carving out routines, finding strength in comradeship, holding onto fragments of dignity. Others withdraw, their eyes dimming, their voices fading, until they no longer speak at all. And for those haunted by what they endured in the Kessel, captivity offers no escape. Memories of cannibalism linger like shadows. They do not speak of it, yet it hangs unspoken in the silence between them. Some wake from nightmares, gasping, their hands trembling. Others stare at food with vacant expressions, as if remembering meals they wish they had never eaten. Survival here is not only physical, it is psychological, spiritual. To live, one must find meaning even in the meaninglessness of captivity. The survivors become figures of myth in their own right, not for victories won, but for endurance. Their suffering transforms them into symbols, unwilling martyrs of a war that devoured them. I see them as shades wandering through a frozen purgatory, suspended between life and death. History has moved on. The front has shifted westward. Battles rage across Europe. But here, time stands still. The camps are timeless, eternal, as if the war never ended for these men. And when the war does finally end in 1945, their chains do not break. Many remain in captivity for years, forgotten by their homeland, abandoned by the very nation that once exalted them. They are not greeted as heroes, but shunned as reminders of defeat. Among them are voices worth hearing. One prisoner recalls carving a chess set from bread, playing silently in the barracks by candlelight. Another remembers teaching Russian words to comrades, bridging the gap between captor and captive. And another whispers that he survived only by repeating his wife's name each morning, like a prayer. But for every survivor's tale, there are countless others who vanished namelessly into the frozen soil of Russia, their bones mingling with the earth, their stories lost to silence. And yet, a few endure. Years pass, wars end, empires shift, and still they walk, still they breathe, scarred but alive. But when they return home, if they return, the question will haunt them forever. What did survival cost? What did it mean to live when so many others fell? The camps may close, the barbed wire may rust, but the shadow of Stalingrad will follow them forever. The snow has long since melted. The guns have fallen silent, the rubble rebuilt, the banners lowered. Yet I take you now into the echoes that remain, for Stalingrad did not end with surrender, nor with captivity, nor even with the war's end. Its shadow lingers, etched into memory, carved into myth, whispered in shame and in pride. For the horrors of encirclement do not stay buried. They live on, haunting those who survived and shaping the world that came after. It is the late 1940s, the 1950s, and beyond. The survivors of Stalingrad, those few who endured both the cauldron and the captivity, trickle back into Germany. They are gaunt, older than their years, eyes hollow with experiences no words can contain. I watch them step off trains into cities that barely recognize them. Families weep, embrace, or stand silent, struggling to reconcile the man returned with the memory of the man who left. Some wives have remarried, believing their husbands dead. Some children no longer remember their fathers. The war has taken not only years, but bonds. And worse still, many survivors face suspicion. In post-war Germany, surrender is branded as weakness. Tales of cannibalism, whispered rumors of what happened inside the Kessel, stain their reputations. Instead of honor, they return to silence, their experiences locked away behind closed lips. The world itself, however, cannot forget. Stalingrad becomes legend, both in Germany and beyond. For the Soviets, it is a triumph, a symbol of resistance, the moment the tide turned against Hitler's empire. The name Stalingrad is spoken with pride, etched onto banners, celebrated in parades. For Germany, it is shame, a wound that never heals. Stalingrad becomes shorthand for hubris punished, for the arrogance of conquest undone by the fury of reality. And for the survivors, it is both, a memory too heavy to bear, yet impossible to escape. Diaries remain hidden for decades, some only discovered long after their authors' deaths. Letters speak of hunger, of snow, of despair. Few speak of cannibalism. That word is buried deep, a secret too monstrous to voice. I hear it in their silences, in the way they avert their eyes when asked about Stalingrad. I see it in the way they carry themselves, haunted, burdened, as if the battlefield still clings to their shoulders. The true legacy of Stalingrad lies not only in history books, but in the minds of those who lived it. Trauma does not fade with time, it festers. Survivors dream of snow that never melts, of comrades who whisper in the night, of empty pots simmering with nameless contents. Some drink to forget. Some fall into madness. Some bury their memories so deep that their children never know the truth. And yet, the echoes break through, in sudden rages, in haunted silences, in the hollow look of eyes that have seen too much. Cannibalism, in particular, becomes the unspoken shadow. Few admit it, yet many suspect. It is a secret not only of survival, but of shame, a truth too unbearable to face. It lingers like a ghost, shaping how survivors see themselves, how they are seen by others, how history whispers of them. Stalingrad becomes more than a battle. It becomes a myth of human endurance and human collapse. For some, it is a story of sacrifice, of soldiers who endured the impossible. For others, it is a story of horror, of men stripped of dignity, of hunger driving them to unspeakable acts. For the world, it is a turning point, the moment the conqueror became the conquered, the invincible undone. The snow of Stalingrad, once red with blood, becomes a symbol of hubris punished, of empire humbled, of humanity tested and broken. And in the myth, cannibalism takes on a terrible symbolism. It is not just the act of survival, it is the collapse of civilization itself, the point at which men became beasts, devouring their own in the cold silence of winter. I think of individuals lost in this legend, the young soldier who returned, silent, never telling his children where the scars came from, the officer who confessed in his diary that he envied the dead, for they no longer felt hunger, the prisoner who survived 10 years in the camps, only to die within months of returning home, his body too frail to enjoy freedom. These are the real legacies, not the maps of battlefields, not the numbers of dead, but the lives scarred, the generations haunted. I stand now in modern Stalingrad, Volgograd. The city is rebuilt, bustling, alive. Children play where once shells fell. Streets hum with cars where once men starved. Yet beneath the concrete and glass, the earth remembers. Bones lie beneath the soil, frozen stories buried in silence. And when the snow falls, it whispers still. I feel the echoes of the encirclement in the cold wind, in the stillness of the night, in the unspoken memories that linger like ghosts. Stalingrad is not gone. It is eternal, a scar on history, a lesson written in ice and blood. And so I leave you with this image. A lone figure walking through falling snow, his breath visible in the cold air, his eyes lost in memory. Behind him, an army of ghosts follows, silent, hungry, endless. Stalingrad is finished. And yet, it is never truly over.